Welcome to Employee Termination Tips. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal. And in this particular video, we're going to discuss how much back pay may be due to yourself. Now, in other videos, we've discussed what back pay represents and how to ascertain what type of back pay might in fact be due to yourself. But another particular question a lot of people have is how much is due? How far back can I look for back pay? And this is a sort of a complicated question due to the fact that a lot of it depends on which province you're employed in. And it also depends on the procedure that you undertake, because every province is dependent upon its own provincial employment standards legislation to provide you with the means to attain back pay after it's been determined. And the one major issue that a lot of people run into is that when they're addressing back pay, if they address it through an employment standards officer and get the employment standards officer to issue an order or a board to issue an order, what tends to happen is the employee is limited to an assessment period. And that assessment period can be as short as 6 months. So you might have been underpaid for years. But if you only bring it up now and you go through employment standards officer, they are limited to only a 6-month period. And because of that, it might not be the most convenient way to approach it. We can look at Section 90 sub 1 of the Alberta Employment Standards Code, and that gives us an example as to the limitations found when going through an employment standards officer. But then there's another approach, and that approach is going through with lawyers and with the court, because there's another particular avenue available with respect to back pay, and that is the deemed trust. And a deemed statutory trust that is created in the legislation itself. And we see that in a number of places. We see that in Section 109 sub 2 of the Alberta Employment Standards Code. We see it in Section 265 of the Saskatchewan Employment Standards Act, Section 100 of the Manitoba Employment Standards Act, and in Ontario with respect to vacation pay alone in Section 40 sub 1 of the Ontario Employment Standards Act 2000. And we'll look at Alberta's, because that's where I practice first, and it has application to the other provinces as to the principles and the law underlying it. And Section 109.2 says, this is important, despite any other act. So it takes precedence over any other act. And the one we're looking at is either the Limitations Act or a statute of limitations that could constrain this to a 2-year period. But it says, despite any other act, every employer is deemed to hold all wages, overtime pay, vacation pay, and general holiday pay accruing or due to an employee in trust for the employee, whether or not the amount accruing due or due has in fact been kept separate and apart by the employer. And this is extremely important. What it does is it sets up a statutory deemed trust that collects all the back pay and puts it into that trust for as long as necessary. And this enables you to overcome the 6-month period that is available only if you go through an employment standards officer, or some argument as to a Limitations Act argument being a statute of limitations that limits the amount of money that is payable in going back. Instead, all this money is collected and is retained by the employer for the benefit of the employee. So you can actually effectively be saying, 10 years ago, you underpaid me these amounts, whether it's wages, overtime pay, vacation pay, and or general holiday pay. And that underpayment now constituting back pay, has been accumulating with the employer, is held in trust, and has, from that moment onwards, always been the money of the employee. And now the legal argument is, based on the statute, that that money remains due and can be requested and collected from the employer because it has always been earned money. Earned money that remains the money of the employee, even though they did not receive it. The employer is simply holding it for their benefit. The principles of trust law. Now, as we've mentioned, we have comparable legislation in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and other provinces, and in Ontario, but in Ontario it is only limited to vacation pay from a statutory basis. But these are the time periods that you're looking for. And when you understand those time periods, you can understand how much more back pay might well be available to somebody, given the fact that you can look back beyond 6 months, beyond 2 years. Look possibly 10 years or more back, because if it's earned money, the legislation says it's accrued and it's held in trust for the benefit of the employee by the employer. So that from the outset, that money is earned and the employer is simply holding it. And now, if you ascertain that you are due that money and you bring it to the fore and you have to go through the courts most likely, you can go and pursue that money because it's earned money that is the employee's money and it's not the employer's money. And that is how you look at back pay in Canada. Thank you.